All right. So, can you go ahead and kind of introduce yourself and how you got involved at the beginning?
My name's Bob Meyer, and if we're talking about Blackmoor
Mm-hmm.
itself, I had been a member of the group around that time. I think when David Arneson first created Blackmoor, and so I ended up, because I didn't know better. I ended up being probably the first player, maybe, or one of the first players of Blackmoor. David play tested it with me, and that was the famous troll game, where he was trying a set of rules, and they didn't work very well. I gave him my opinion of the rules, and he agreed with me, and so he created his own rules, and that's how he came up with the rules for Blackmoor. So even though we say that Blackmoor has no rules, that's not technically correct. Blackmoor had no rules for the players. The game master had all the rules, and yeah, David created it, and it turned out to be quite a creation.
Oh yeah. So, can you tell me what made the troll game so famous?
Um, I suppose it's my fault because of my reaction to it. I don't even remember most of it. I think there were some dwarves playing poker. There's a bridge near Blackmoor over the river that I think goes from the bay or into the bay. And that bridge had a troll. Um, Troll bridge. That's an obvious one. We used a
Mm-hmm.
lot of ropes back then. David did also. They're familiar for us and they're funny. And so there's a troll. And when I showed up for the game, I don't even remember who else was there. I suspect that everyone else involved has passed away now, that I'm the only survivor as a player for that game. And when I showed up, David told me, okay, Bob, you're going to be a hero. Well, that's a great start, I thought. Yeah, I'm a hero. All right. Yeah, I'm going to save the day. Yeah, right, dummy me. And anyway, I'm not sure if I was even doing anything to start with. Um, and I don't remember the rest of the game, except that the troll came out from the bridge and was interfering with people in some way. Do not remember if the troll was stomping them or chasing them or what he was doing. But I'm there to save the day, so I go running up and draw my sword, and the troll was looking away from me, and I thought, this is my opportunity, and I took my chop at the troll. And David gave me the dice to roll. Now, I remember it as a bunch of dice, but evidently it was only two six-sided dice. That's when the game started. Everyone had six-sided dice. No one had multi-sided dice. That's what we used, six-sided dice. Evidently, he gave me a couple six-sided dice. I rolled the dice and missed. Did nothing at all. As a matter of fact, it was so pathetic a chop that the troll did not even notice me. So David said, okay, Bob, go at it again. So I went at it again, rolled the dice, and this time I did better. Unfortunately, because better was not enough to do any damage, but it was enough to draw the attention of the troll, who turned around and noticed me. And then it was one-on-one. And once again, I'm rolling the dice, and once again, a piss poor die roll, and the troll, no. The troll, David rolled the dice for the troll, and if I didn't have the phone in my hands, I'll clap my hands together dramatically to show just exactly what happened to my player character. And that was the end of that. And I'm not sure how much longer the game went on after that, if it did at all. But I told David what I thought of the rules, and he agreed with me that, yeah, this is not working. It was all or nothing, and that's ridiculous. So that's when he decided to dump those rules, or not. He wasn't even using them. This was the play test, and he just came up with his own rules. And I have a theory as to where they came from. class. People have often asked, why is plate armor class 0? And then the higher the numbers, the worse the protection. Well, we played a Civil War game, naval game. I don't even remember the name of it. Jeff remembers it. This guy had, matter of fact, the game was so complicated. This guy had entered the tables into an Atari computer. This is how old all of this is. And David and I used to go to his house to play. And in that game, at that time, Civil War ships had all kinds of different types of protection. The best possible were ironclads that were built as ironclads, and they were armor class 0, and that made a difference on the tables. And the higher the number, the less the protection, until you got down to rowboats that were just wood. You know, because there were ships that were tin clads, there were ships that had armor added afterwards, they had cotton bales, they had extra thick wood, and that's why the armor classes in Blackmoor, and thus D&D, start at 0, because that's what it was in that game. And I think that a lot of the rules he came up with probably came out of that game also, because there were so many different ways that you could have combat, which was exactly what he wanted. And the thing is that I've told that story over and over ever since then. And I think even though it's a Blackmoor story, it kind of got out there. But there was something else about the game which made it even more important, and that is the first actual physical evidence of a Blackmoor game. And that is, we had a broadside that Arneson printed out because we were playing the Napoleonic campaign at the time, and with the miniatures and everything, and people were doing so many things that to keep track of everything and to inform all the players, there must have been at least 24 players in the game. He had this broadside that he mimeographed, again, shows how old this was, that he distributed to the people to announce, yeah, France has declared war against Germany, that kind of thing. And in one of these, there's mention about, we're going to have a game, and I forget exactly what it said. You'd have to look at the original to see the exact wording. But he announced this game that he was going to have on May 24th, 1971. And that's the one I showed up for, the Troll game. That's the first actual evidence of... we had played role-playing games before then. Of course, there was Brownstone and Brownstein.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the first actual evidence of one of our role-playing games, that it was in that broadside. So people actually accept that as being evidence of Blackmoor in 1971. Now, Greg and I have always maintained that it actually started in 1970. I don't know why. Greg has more of a recollection of it. That's Greg Svensson. Because of things that he was doing back then, because he had to go away in that fall for something, and that he had played the infamous basement game. And so I probably was not the first character killed. As a matter of fact, I'm not sure just how David would have done this. It's all very vague, and I don't know. It's very mixed up, especially in my mind. Where the first recollection Greg has of a Blackmoor game was we used to play in the Arneson house. That is, David lived with his parents at the time. And so we would go down the stairs into the basement to play. And for that game, I don't know, 3 or 4 guys showed up, and David said, okay, we're going to have a game. And I need you guys to go off into the laundry room and stay there while I set everything up. And he did, and then he shut off the lights and he called the guys in. So basically that was the first dungeon adventure.
Oh, wow.
The lights were off, they're underground, and that's the setting into a dungeon. That some bad guy, I think it was an evil wizard, had stolen something. Maybe a person, a princess, I do not know. Greg would know better than I would. And he, the guy's adventure to try to take back whatever that evil person had taken, and the evil person killed everyone, all the player characters except Graves. And the reason he did not kill Graves was because he told him, "You are going back with a message," and he sent him back with a message.
Okay.
So that was the first dungeon adventure. It was actually a physical adventure in addition to being a dungeon adventure.
Oh, wow. And you said this probably happened in 1970?
Greg would know better than I would. The only game I was aware of was that game with the, as a matter of fact, it's called the poker game, actually. Because I believe they were dwarves playing poker in the game. I don't know. I mixed up about all of this. All I remember really is my part in that game with the troll.
Oh,
it may
yes.
not even have been the game with the poker game. It could have been a separate one, because people have unearthed evidence that there actually was a game in April of that year. Now, all of this means something to me because my birthday is May 23rd. And this game supposedly happened on May 24th, the day after my birthday. And so I turned 21 that year. So I don't know. Maybe the troll was in the April game, for all I know. All I know is there was a game that was actually announced in the broadside was called the corner of the table, because that's where they always put it, the corner of the table while they did their playing.
Oh, okay.
And so I know I participated in a game that year, about the middle of the year, and that's all I can remember is my abject failure in the first single combat that I am aware of. But some of the other guys may be aware of others. Unfortunately, as I said, I think I'm the only surviving player from that game.
Right.
But I have a suspicion as to who some of the other players were, and they're gone now. They passed away.
Okay. I know one of your characters, Robert the Bald, got pretty famous throughout the years. Do you want to tell me about him and kind of how he came about and what he did?
Well, I've mentioned to you before, I don't care for magic. I don't care for magic users, even when they're on my team, let alone facing them. And I prefer fighting men. And so the only thing I can conceive of with this guy is that this might have come out of the session, actually, when, you see, after the troll game, I told David that, okay, you know, and I never have played Brownstein. I tried Brownstone, and I didn't care for it. I dropped out after a game or two. And I told David after the troll game that, okay, alright, fine. I'm not interested in role-playing games. I'm a board gamer. Okay, you let it go at that. But all the guys got really involved in Blackmoor. And it got to the point where I'd show up for the scheduled games, and it's going to be Blackmoor that day, so everyone's playing Blackmoor. No one wants to play a board game with me. So after a couple of months of that, I consented to, yeah, okay, fine, I'll play in your game. And as I've mentioned to you, I'm a very aggressive player. And thus, well, the moniker Robert the Bold, which became Robert the Bald. And in any case, that doesn't work well. I mean, the analogy I've used with people is the original Star Trek, the red shirt, the crewmen that would go down to the planet, and their whole purpose is to die.
Right.
And that's the way it was in these adventures, because by this time these guys are level 3 or level 4, and they want to go where the treasure is, the good stuff, the magic stuff, and everything. And so they're going down in the dungeon by this time, which is where I got my first aversion to dungeons, because I would take along with, and I was the red shirt, I would die every time. And so I finally went to David and told him, I've given it a shot, that's it, I'm done. And he told me, wait a minute, Bob, we're going to take care of this. And he sat down with me. It must have been for hours. I mean, it could have been just an hour, but my recollection, especially since what he was doing was teaching me how to play a fantasy role-playing game. And that it's really not a good idea as a first level person to go charging an orc, let alone something like a troll. And so he taught me basically how to play the game. And in doing so, he got at least one of my characters up to a higher level. That is like a level 2. And the first thing I did, of course, was to do the thing that all the guys in the game were doing, which was to throw a curveball at David, which he is always able to catch. I mean, the guy, he was so quick on his feet, he was so fast thinking. I told him, okay, great. Well, I hate dungeons, of course, so I'm going outdoors. And David said, okay, where do you want to go? I said, well, you and I are both naval enthusiasts. I want to go up and join the Scandinavians. David said, fine. How are you going to do that, Bob? You don't have a boat. Oh, well, I'll walk. Well, the coast is too dangerous. All right, I'll walk through those woods. Those are the Elfin Woods. And I did not know anything about them at the time, so, the usual ignorance. What is the phrase? Courage from ignorance. And David said, well, Bob, no one ever makes it through the woods. And I told him, so? I'll be the first. And I was. Some gamers complain about how bad their die rolls are. I mean, famously in my troll game, they were atrocious. I usually have bad die rolls, but my luck is really streaky. Sometimes it gets really good. And I made it all the way through the woods, and I joined the Scandinavians, and I adventured there for quite a while. And then one of the other players, Kurt Cry, whose player character had been banned from Blackmoor because he helped an invasion take over Blackmoor, Kurt wanted to go back to Blackmoor, so his character showed up there. He talked me into going back. I defeated the captain of the boat, who actually had like 3 boats, 2 or 3 boats. And so we adventured back to Blackmoor, which was a terrible idea, as proved by the fact that by the time I arrived back in Blackmoor, I was down to 1 boat and maybe 12 crewmen left. And Gertie, the dragon on the Dragon Rock, had a particular hatred for Scandinavians because of previous invasions by them, and he took care of the boat and most of the crewmen, and there I was back in Blackmoor all right, but with nothing to my name, and so I ended up going down in the dungeon because I needed something to build myself back up, and the character thrived. And the thing is, as soon as I had enough to work with, I went out adventuring in the outdoors. And there's a Avalon Hill game called Outdoor Survival that I really liked. I loved to play it. Most other players didn't. It was too boring, I guess, for them. But I really loved Outdoor Survival, and David used that, as a matter of fact, when some of the players were banned from Blackmoor for something, some transgression. I guess they allowed an invasion to get through or something. They were told, well, you have to go down to this gray area between Blackmoor and the Great Kingdom, which no one is in control of, and so we went down there, and David used the Outdoor Survival map for that, because these little huts, which were like caches of supplies, he said, okay, those are towers. Each of you pick a tower. And then we did that. Some of them prospered like I did. Some of them did not. There were peasant revolts. And in my case, I prospered because I had enough wealth by then that what I did was I set myself up in the tower, and I deliberately picked out, to me, in the Tolkien books, the characters I really loved the most were the horse riders. What are they? Riders of Rohan.
Oh, yes.
And so I picked a place at the very end of a mountain range, and with a lot of plains near it, and the people that inhabited that area were great horsemen. At least I proclaimed they were. Or maybe David just said, "Yeah, Bob, they can be whatever you want." And so what I did was I used my wealth then to buy a bunch of horses and to train the people, so I had the Riders of Rohan. And I know I'm skipping over a lot of adventuring, but none of it really stands out in my mind, except for one adventure I was in. None of that really stands out in my mind. As a matter of fact, I've forgotten all of them. This one adventure stands out in my mind because I was in an adventure with Fred Funk.
Okay.
Now, if anyone that knew Fred Funk, they would tell you that Fred's crazy. As much in real life as not. Unfortunately, he also has passed away.
Okay.
It's been 15 years now, and but he was, as I mentioned, he was one of the guys that I gamed with in high school. So I had kind of a soft spot for him. As a matter of fact, I shared an apartment with him later on. I ended up having to move out because Fred wasn't very good about real life. I mean, he was basically all tied up in fantasy, which is fine. I can understand that. There are times when I want to be in a fantasy world instead of real life, but the main thing is that we were on an adventure, Fred and I, and in this case, this was a different character than Robert the Bald. But I'll continue the story anyway. After Robert the Bald was taken by the gods, I started another character, a half-elf. And the half-elf became very good, had lots of magical items, the armor, the sword, and everything. As a matter of fact, so much so that I glowed in the dark.
Oh, wow.
And so we camped for the night in a band of orcs, or what are they called? I don't remember anymore. It's on the tip of my tongue. But anyway, a band, let's call them orcs, attacked the camp. Now, my character was so good by then, and what I really liked about him is that he was a combination fighting man, magic user, and cleric. Well, with my disdain for magic, I mostly operated as a fighting man. And my strength was so powerful that I would draw my sword and wade into the middle of them, because I think it was Peter Gaylord was the game master for that. With my strokes, I was scoring so big that I could kill 2 or 3 or 4 with one stroke. And so it was better for me to be in the middle of them, so I didn't waste any of my strokes.
Right.
Well, Fred was a magic user, and he knew better than to wade into them. But it was night, and he could see me, but he could not see the orcs. So what Fred did was he started throwing fireballs with me as the target. Because he knew that all these orcs were all around me, and he knew he wouldn't kill me, but he'd get a whole bunch of the orcs. And so there we are, I'm chopping away, and I'm screaming to Fred, "Knock it off!" And Fred's going, "What's the problem? We're defeating them." And sure enough, we did, of course, but I was not too happy about it. But that was another character after. So the only other adventure that I can remember is one that Robert the Bald did, and that is I basically retired to my tower, and Richard Snyder and my brain is going John Snyder had nearby towers, and they had noticed this yellow mist in some way. I do not remember how, because it actually was in a cavern. Maybe they had adventured there, and they asked me to come along with to investigate it. Well, that got my attention, even though I was basically retired. So, okay, fine, so I'll go along with. And it turned into a disaster. I think they almost killed John's character, maybe Richard's character, maybe both. I managed to get away somehow through using the hated magic. I think I teleported out or something. That actually is a story that other people know better than I do. The story of the Yellow Mist. One thing is that it turned out that my tower is in a range of mountains called the Dragon Mountains, I believe. Later mythology on it. And the City of the Gods is in the valley next to the mountains. So maybe that's where the Yellow Mist was. I don't remember. But my character, yeah, we had a stable of characters, basically. If we were all fighting men and the people that showed up for a game, then someone would volunteer to be a magic user or a cleric, and so we had 2 or 3 different player characters at any one time, and depending on the adventure, we'd trot out the one that was most useful, or the one that we thought we would have the most fun with.
Right.
And Robert the Bald was so successful that, we all kind of wondered as to what would happen when we reached the highest level. The highest level for, I think, any of the characters was 20th level. And come to think of it, Richard Snyder was close to that also, so the Yellow Mist must not have gotten him. And I was the highest, and Greg Svensson was canny. He was smarter than us. Svenny, the Bold, I think, his character, he never really went up very fast in points because he didn't want to lose his character. I think he had an inkling of what would happen. We all did, sort of. And when I retired to the tower, I studied all these magical artifacts that I had, and David Arneson ruled that I was going up with points. Okay, fine, because I was not out adventuring. And I was doing all this other stuff too. A band of wandering elves had settled there, and other things also. I lent out my army of Rohan riders at one time to Greg and some of the other people when Blackmoor was invaded by the people that live on the steppes. And and that helped them to repel them. And I think they were crucial in the battle, which I was happy about. So I was going up in points regardless. And then I reached the highest level. And I was the first one. And so I was the one who got to go to David and tell him, I'm 20th level now, David. What now? And David looked at me with that smile he has on his face, which makes us shiver in our boots. And he said, well, Bob, and he put out his hand and said, give me the character sheet, which I did. He said, Bob, the gods welcome you. And that was the end of Robert the Bold. Whatever.
Right. Both, right? So, so was Robert a Bald? He was a magic user, correct? Not a cleric?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And I definitely want to circle back. You mentioned that you went through the elf forest, and you met with and kind of spent some time with Scandaharians.
Yes, that's David's version. David has Norwegian heritage, so of course he had to have something Scandinavian in the game. So at the north end of the map, he put the Scandaharians, which were his version of the Scandinavians. So they had the longboats and everything.
Okay, so they're kind of like modeled after the ancient Scandinavian, like Vikings and things like that. for lack of a
Exactly.
better term. Okay.
Yes.
And what made the Elven Forest so dangerous?
Well, I remembered it wrong. I always remembered it as, oh, well, no one ever made it through because they died. That's not true. I was corrected by someone who did know, and which is fortunate because I still don't remember. But what happened is the elves in that forest, which are not very far away from the humans in Blackmoor, do not like intrusions. They did not like humans wandering into their forest. And the forest is big. It takes days to get through it, especially if you're going as far north as Scandinavia. And so what would happen is the people would go in there, whether they're wandering or had an actual goal in mind, and they would have to bed down for the night. Then the elves would throw a spell on them that caused them to stay asleep. Then they would pick them up and take them back to where they started at the edge of the woods and leave them there, and so that's where they would wake up the next morning.
Okay, and they had to start.
They weren't actually dangerous per se. I suppose if someone persisted, that the elves might become more adamant about it in a physical way, but they weren't really dangerous. It's just you couldn't make your way through there. And what happened is, and I think David did this deliberately. I was noted for rolling ones, which meant that, like in Napoleonics for morale throws, the smaller the number, the better, because you have a morale rating for each of your units. And when you're in combat, after so many casualties, you have to roll a number underneath that number. So my troops that I commanded always stood. They didn't run away. But when you have something like shooting in Don't Give Up the Ship, where the higher numbers are better, especially sixes, I always did poorly. Well, I rolled a lot of ones for some reason. And so to get through the woods, David gave me a dice and said, okay, Bob, it's the end of the first day, roll the dice. I rolled a 1. So, okay, next day, continue on, roll the dice. I rolled 4 ones in a row. And I think David deliberately set it up so that I needed to roll low, because normally in Blackmoor you want high numbers.
Right.
But in this case, I guess it's like making a saving throw.
Okay, okay. Or like a morale check or something like that where you need
Yeah.
to roll low.
Yeah. So I made it all the way through the woods of Scandinavia. I think, in a way, David may have wanted me there because that gave him an advantage, or a opportunity to come up with naval rules. And then while I was adventuring with the Scandinavians out to sea, we came upon a rock nest, or tarn nest, whichever. Rock, I think, is the proper term. And I found a couple goslings, rocklings, and I raised them, and then I would ride them out from the ship to find other ships to attack.
Oh, wow.
And this may be the rules that Griffith Morgan has now. I'm not sure. I know he has a set of air rules that David Arneson wrote up. It might have something to do with that. I don't know. I may be giving myself much more credit than I deserve, and probably am. But we did all kinds of crazy things that David had to come up with. There was the invasion by the Egg of Coot. They had to fight out battles. I think that's why he tried out the rules with the troll, because he wanted rules that maybe he could use, scaled down from the big battles down to individual combat. And then Dwayne Jenkins loved that Dark Shadows, so of course there had to be vampires in the game. And David McGarry was the head of the Guild of Workers, and which turned out to be actually a bandit outfit kind of thing. And he had his headquarters in Blackmoor, not too far away from the I don't know, I suppose I'll call it the church. the cathedral. That who was it? That was I think that was Mike Carr, or maybe Dan Nicholson was the priest. Um, the archbishop there, and he had a huge treasure trove in his basement, and so David dug down from his building that was his guild headquarters, and then tunneled over underneath the cathedral, and he robbed it.
Oh no.
Yeah, so we were doing all kinds of crazy things. Peter Gaylord with the HO scale tree that represented his woods that kept dropping these representations of oranges, I think, off of the tree. And Peter said, well, those are magic berries. I use them to make magic, depending on how whether I fricassee them or cut them up or stew them or whatever. We were coming up with all kinds of crazy things.
It
And David always went along with it. If it worked, it worked. This is what he wanted, creativity. He was tired of the old hack and slash of things like Napoleonics, miniatures, where you just go and you fight a battle, people die, and someone runs away, sort of thing. What he wanted was people to be creative. All right, if you want to go in hacking away at a bunch of orcs, well, go ahead, but, you could die if you do that, and that would make us think, well, maybe I can go around the band of orcs, sort of thing, figure out a way to do it. He always rewarded creativity. He much preferred, he was not against combat. I mean, he had combat rules after all, he expected us to do it. But, the more creative we were, the more he liked it, and the more he kept it in the game. So, as a result, we had just about everything in Blackmoor that ended up in D&D. We had fighting men, magic users, clerics, thieves, mermaids even. He had a bunch of creatures that lived in the bay. Kind of, I think he modeled them after the creature from the Black Lagoon.
okay.
And then Stephen Rockford was the high priest of the frog god or something like that. I don't know. I never was involved with that. We came up with all kinds of crazy things. You name it, we did it.
Oh yeah, it definitely sounded like you guys kept David on his toes for sure, and you really had to think on his feet and be like, oh, okay, I better make a rule for that, or
Yeah, exactly.
you
And
know.
he never told us the rules. He didn't have to. We were all experienced gamers. Most of it had been gaming. As a matter of fact, I learned how to play chess when I was about 5, I think. And I've been playing board games ever since. And so I played with my brother these little air-fixed plastic soldiers. I remember, these things, a lot of them aren't allowed anymore because they're too dangerous for kids. Okay, well, we had some Civil War figures, and the cannons came along with. And the unique thing about these cannons is that if you pulled back on the back of it, they were actually a breech loader. You'd load a BB into it, and then you'd do something. I think you flicked it with your thumb or whatever, and it would shoot the BB.
Oh wow.
So we were shooting at each other's soldiers to knock them over. Oh, that one's dead. I just knocked it over, kind of thing. But that's the thing, that we're all experienced gamers. We didn't need rules. We could actually be in the game. As a matter of fact, most of the guys basically had alter egos in the game. That is, they named their characters. Boozero or Marfeld the Barbarian or whatever. I don't even I never paid any attention to that, because to me it was always, well, I'm gaming with David, Peter, and Dan, and so I never paid attention to that.
Right.
In my case, I never named my characters, so it was always just, Bob, do this, Bob, do that, Bob, are you going to do something, kind of thing. And that's why David ended up naming my character for publication, because it was always just Bob.
Right.
And he thought, well, that's not really all that, for the person that was the greatest wizard in the world, that's not very dignified. So he came up with the name of Robert the Bold. And of course, when it was published, it became Robert the Bald.
Which I think is more dignified than Robert the Bold for sure.
Well, there was a leader in France, in one of the many states back then, it wasn't France yet, named Charles the Bald. And historians are still puzzled about that. I think he was called that. Now, of course, medieval times, you think different than we do now. I think they called him Charles the Bald because he didn't have any actual lands at one time.
Oh,
So
yeah.
he was bald of territories. But yeah, Robert the Bald, I'm good with it. What the heck? I've been called worse.
Right, yeah. Did you, even though you didn't like magic, did you have like a favorite spell or like a favorite thing your character did consistently?
I don't remember with that character. I do remember another character I had.
Okay.
Are you familiar with blink dogs?
No.
Okay, that's something that came up, I think, in D&D. I don't think we had it in Blackmoor.
Oh, blink dogs?
Blink dog is very much, it looks very much like a wolf. It's the same size, same look and everything, and just as ferocious. As a matter of fact, I should have called it a blink wolf. But anyway, blink dogs have a natural ability to teleport.
Oh, yes,
And
okay.
at one time, one of the characters I had, and still have, actually, is a blink dog. And that was a favorite of mine because it was always easy for me to get out of a situation if I had stepped into it wrong. And, if it got too hairy, I'll just blink out of there.
Oh,
So I
yes.
guess that would be my favorite spell. And that wasn't even with Robert the Bald. I had so many magical items as Robert the Bald. It got to the point where I was so powerful that I could work my way around traps if I even had anything to do with them. The other guys like fooling around with them.
Right.
And so I had so many magical items. Like I said, my character retired to his tower just to study everything. The scrolls, and I had a rod of fireballs. And this is where the space campaign, John's space campaign, kind of came into it with a crashed spaceship, because things like we kind of after the fact would give an explanation of, well, what is a fireball? What do you call the wand? What's the fireball wand? Well, that's actually a blaster from a spaceship. And that's
Oh.
why it only has so many times you can use it, and then it has to be recharged, sort of thing. So, I had all of that stuff. And it was a case, as a matter of fact, it got to a case where it was kind of boring. And that's why I retired the character to the tower and started up a new character who I said, okay, I have a new character now. This character is a half-elf, paladin, which you're not supposed to be, but David allowed for me. And this guy is actually the son of Robert the Bald, because all these elves settled in around his tower, and he took a wife, and so this is the son of Robert the Bald.
Okay.
That character was a lot more interesting because, as a half-elf, I could be all three. And but mainly I just, I know, I'm the typical hack and slash kind of guy.
Hey, that's okay. Magic users are complicated.
Yeah, that's one way to put it.
Right, a nice way to put it anyway. All right, I know we kind of talked about this in a previous conversation, but you took over the game running Blackmoor in 2009 when Dave Anderson passed.
Yes, David Arneson passed away in April of 2009. Now,
Okay.
David was a professor at a college or university down in Florida for many years, and but he wanted to keep Blackmoor going, even though D&D was the big thing starting 1974. He wanted to keep Blackmoor going with the old timers, those of us from the old group. And so he made sure to run at least one game every year, usually more than one, with us. And every year he came back from Florida in May, which is the unofficial, official start of Blackmoor because of what was noted in the corner of the table of May 1971. And that also, I believe, was D&D Day. He would go to the Source, a local game shop, and they would have a small table set up for him to sit at so he could talk to anyone who wanted to come up and talk to him, and he could autograph whatever of theirs. And I live not very far from where the Source is, so I always made a point, since I did not really have any contact with David while he was down there, of coming over to the Source every time he came in.
Mm-hmm.
And I would talk with him. And then after a while he would move to a larger table and invite anyone that wanted to participate in the game. Now, by this time, there's not that many of us old-timers left to play in the games. So it's mostly strangers, mostly young people, which is fine. I mean, we like that, but he always talked me into it. It was real easy. You know, he would say, "Oh, Bob, it's time for me to start the game. You're starting to play the game, aren't you? You're staying to play the game, aren't you?" Yeah, sure, David. And so I would end up playing the game with him. Now, I had been playing Blackmoor games, running Blackmoor games for a long time while David was still alive. And because, of course, David was down in Florida, so Peter Gaylord and I usually ran the Blackmoor games by that time. There were other people that ran games earlier, but in any case, he passed away in April of 2009, so he was not available for the game in May. And someone, I suspect David McGarry, set up to play a Blackmoor game on that day in the Source, and he arranged, he notified people and arranged for us to have a table, and at the very last minute, he became unavailable. So I was given a call and asked if I would go down and run the game. And sure, no problem. And I wanted to make this a true Blackmoor game. So what I did was I set up a storyline to honor David and the game, and that was, first of all, none of these many-sided dice. We started with 2 6-sided dice. That's what I'll use. And we're going back to where, forget all the rules from D&D and all of that stuff. Don't worry about it. I mean, basically, David's rules were published as Dungeons & Dragons. I mean, yeah, Gary added a lot to it, but it was basically David's rules.
Mm-hmm.
So I came up with my own rules, which was easy to do because when David came out with Adventures in Fantasy, he asked me to come up with a combat system, which I did. Wonderfully complicated. David thanked me very much for it and used someone else's, which was a smart thing to do. But I still had those rules, and it was easy to expand them because I'd played Blackmoor by that time for almost 40 years.
Oh, wow.
And so it was easy for me to come up with my own rules.
Mm-hmm.
So that way then they didn't know exactly what's going on. And I hated dungeons, but everyone liked castles. So what I did was, my theory was that the kingdom was usurped. The king and the princess, that is David's daughter Malia, her character, left the kingdom to avoid a civil war, and the usurper plundered the kingdom and then left, and everything fell apart. And he didn't keep up anything. All the creatures came in and took over. All the people were leaving. And I started out the whole adventure, as you'll read in that article that was written by the reporter. I started out by announcing the king is dead. An homage, obviously, to David, who was a very good close friend of mine and who I dearly loved. And so the princess, now the queen, wishes to go back into the kingdom, straighten everything out, and she's going to start with a castle. So she's come back with a small army. She's clearing out the village, and she sent some of the uh, more experienced soldiers up to the castle. The palace guard is what I called them, that had gone into exile with them. And that's the guys that showed up for the game because they were all old timers from the game. You know, Wesley, Maker, I don't remember who all was there. Probably Peter Gaylord, maybe not. Bill Voss, um, ooh, Bel Musalevich. So it was half a dozen people. And so they were tasked with clearing out the castle, and I populated it very simply with just orcs. And very few traps of any kind or anything like that. It was just simple. You know, it's like a dungeon. Basically, I don't know if you've ever seen a diagram of the castle, but it is complicated.
Oh yeah.
And I've told people that, you know, when you're trapped in a dungeon, you die screaming underground. If you're trapped in a castle, you jump out the nearest window and you die screaming when you hit the ground. And so this was like a dungeon adventure, but in the castle. And they successfully cleared the whole thing out, and that was the end of the first adventure. And then the next year, people started calling me saying, Bob, May's coming up. You're going to run it again, aren't you? Yeah, sure. And I ran it again. And then I don't remember if I finally got smart by the next year or if it took another year of them calling, but I realized that this is going to keep going on. And so I called them and set up the game. And I was doing it ever since then.
Oh wow. I'm definitely interested in like how you created your own history for Blackmoor when you kind of took over. I guess the anniversary game, for lack of a better term.
I call it the Memorial Game, the
Or
Blackmoor Memorial Game.
yes, and I'm curious. I would like to hear more about the history you set up because you kind of just took it and started your whole thing, like your own storyline with it.
Yeah, well, like I wanted to start it over again because David was gone now, but I wanted it to still be Blackmoor. So at first it was a case of, well, this is how Blackmoor first started, or something like that, and then maybe it's an alternate history. I mean, it doesn't quite fit into the old campaign in any way, shape, or form. But as starting it over again as a memorial game, what I was doing was going back to the roots. Two six-sided dice, rules that no one knew, but they did not need to know because they already knew how to play these games. And, you know, they had no clue when they rolled the dice. There's no tables or anything, you know, graphs or whatever for them to look at. Something would happen, and sometimes I would just tell them, okay, this is what happened, and sometimes I'd say, roll the dice, and they'd roll the dice. The thing is that I could run the game without the dice. They're not necessary. They put a randomness into it, which I already had. Like I said, my combat rules were extremely complicated. Well, my rules were extremely complicated too, which is one reason why I've stopped running games, because I don't remember them anymore. So I had, it was basically a function chart, one after another. You know, they'd roll the dice, and most of the results are right there, depending on the dice that they roll, and some of them indicate, well, something special happened, so I have to go to the next table, and so on and so forth. So this way, people had no idea as to what would happen. And I was experienced enough that I could do just about anything. You know, the whole purpose of the game, of any gaming, is to have fun. And I made it fun for them. And actually, one of the highest compliments I've ever been given was when old timers, guys from with me, and said, it's just like gaming with me. It's, I like I like simplicity, and I like complication. I'm typical bipolar person, I guess. And thing is that, I tell them to roll the dice, and it's fun. Because they caught on right away that you do not want to roll snake eyes and you want to roll boxcars.
Right?
And, someone like David McGarry had a tendency like me to roll ones. And it's really funny. As a matter of fact, it's on tape. They filmed, I ran a game for Griff. Had a whole bunch of the people come over. I think there were some 24 of them. They're up in our garden room. It's a room we have over the garage. It's about 30 foot by 30 foot. And David actually had run a Blackmoor game in that one time when the source was not available. And so I ran a game for Griff to film there. And Malia and her daughter showed up, and Malia's husband was there, and we had a game, and David McGarry was doing his usual rolling ones, and it's a very visual effect. I tell David, roll the dice, David. And he said, well, okay. He's always tentative about everything. I mean, the guy's smart, but he's always tentative about things, especially rolling dice. He said, oh, well, okay. And he'll grab the dice, and he'll shake it and shake it and shake it, and then drop it. And I remember one time he dropped it, and the guys next to him looked at it and started laughing, and he reacted. He just took his glasses off and rubbed the bridge of his nose because he rolled snake eyes again.
Oh, no.
But yeah, it was easy to do because, the whole idea of the dice is not to just add, I used the word just a few seconds ago, and I can't think of it, variability kind of thing, into the game. And it's a fun factor for the players. It's very tactile to have dice in your hand instead of someone telling you, okay, that's what you want to do, this is what happens.
Right.
That you're rolling the dice. You have some control over your future. It may be bad, it may be good, you don't know. And that's a big part of what makes it fun.
Exactly. And those dice are traitors anyways.
Oh, you can tell a gamer, that's for sure.
Exactly. So that's really cool that you did that, and you kind of mentioned it earlier about you took like the fantastical history of the old Blackmoor campaign and kind of started fresh with it by how the Civil War happened and the princess.
To avoid the Civil War.
Yeah, to avoid the Civil War.
At the time, I was very anti-Gygax. I did not know the backstory. Now that I've learned everything that's happened, I understand Gary Gygax now. But back then, it was a usurper came in with a golden tongue, this whole thing of Gary taking all the credit. And he convinced the people the king was not doing enough, that the people could live like royalty if they only would listen to him. And so the king ended up having to leave because the people believed the usurper. The usurper took over, but he did that just so he could loot the kingdom. Which is what happened with TSR, basically. TSR was a Ponzi scheme. And so and they left, and the kingdom fell apart. The king passed away, and now the queen wanted to go back and take the kingdom back so people can all come back, kind of thing. And the thing is that it's a storyline that gives you all kinds of possibilities. So it wasn't just something that I was doing as an homage to David. It also was something I was doing with all these things going on. I like backstories. A lot of people do. And so I gave them the backstory before I started that game, and they loved it. And then we played the game, and they loved that. And so it just kept going on and on after that for some 15 years.
Oh, yeah. And so you guys kind of did it continue the same story every year where you keep working on reclaiming Blackmoor Castle and rebuilding the towns and kind of clearing out the monsters in the wilds to rebuild the kingdom?
Well, you don't have the same people showing up for each game.
Of course, yes,
so,
yes.
Like the second game, it was a different set of people, so I just replayed the scenario.
Oh, okay.
The castle. And the third time, Um, some of the same people were showing up, and then I kind of expanded it. So there's a basement under the castle. I expanded it into the basement, and then after that, I didn't want it to be boring, and quite often I started them outside the castle. That's usually what I did, and so there are adventures outside the castle also, in the town or in the surrounding terrain. And so I started putting them down in the dungeon. And my theory on the dungeon is that this actually, going back to the space campaign, this was actually a kind of a laboratory that was set up by aliens underneath this castle because it was a magical nexus. That's a big thing about Blackmoor Castle. It's on top of a rock, which is the end of a peninsula, and it's a magic nexus.
Okay.
And you can take whichever you want that it was to begin with, or the aliens made it that way, and they brought in all these creatures, which is why you have all these creatures around, and that sort of thing. And then yeah, so it was a campaign because it was basically what happened one year affected what was going on the next year. Like the big game that I had in 2019, where I had a dragon show up who was very inimical to people. Well, the reason for that is because the dragons had been using the dungeon as a nursery. So there were baby dragons there, and the adventurers had killed a baby dragon, and so the dragons vowed revenge. And that's why when the dragon showed up in the middle of the big sea battle, that it turned into a big dragon battle.
Oh yeah.
But I'm going to have to cut it short.
Of course.
I'm going to have to get out to the garden and get that taken care of. And my wife, I can hear she's up now.
Okay.
And so, unfortunately, I have to go. But yeah, I'm more than willing to continue this for you if you can remember your points you want me to talk about.
Oh, of course. Yeah, I figured, just a couple questions at a time and split it up, I think would be the best way to do it. But it's been great to hear these stories and talk to you, and I really appreciate it.
I do too. I mean, after all, this is my life. I'm getting to tell someone basically my life story. So, what's not to like about that? And I guess I'm a bit of an egotist after all. I'm a storyteller, and which is so different from the way I was as a kid. My wife takes credit for that, and she probably deserves it, but yeah, and she's paying for it because now she always has to stop me and say, Bob, you're talking too much. I gotta go.
Of course.
But thank you, Talon, and let's see, what is today? Today's